The following is part of Cornell Contemporary China Initiative Lecture Series under the Cornell East Asia program. The arguments and viewpoints of this talk belong solely to the speaker. We hope you enjoy.
Welcome to today's event of the Cornell Contemporary China Initiative. My name is Annika Fuhrmann. I'm in the Departments of Asian Studies and Comparative Literature at Cornell, and I'm hosting the initiative's lecture series under the theme of the city Asia this semester. Before I begin with introductions, I would like to remind everyone that we have a final event in this series. It's on April 25th at 4:45 p.m. when Tani Barlow will be speaking on instinct and society. So please keep that in mind. Today, I would like to thank the East Asia program that houses this initiative, and also especially Amala Lane for organizing this series. I would also like to thank the Departments of Asian Studies, History, and Comparative Literature, as well as the Migration Initiative and the Society for the Humanities for their generous co-sponsorship of these events. Today, I am very excited to welcome my friend and our colleague, Kimiko Suda. A sociologist and sinologist by training, Dr. Suda's work focuses on contemporary urban Chinese cultures and migrations. Her work presents a rich qualitative sociological inquiry into new formations of class and belonging, migration, and urban space in contemporary China. Much of Dr. Suda's work has concentrated on Guangzhou or Guangzhou, analyzing this city's migratory populations in relation to changing political and economic circumstances. The research she will be speaking on today was conducted in Guangzhou over many years and published in 2021 by the German academic publishing house Transcript in their Urban Studies series. The title of this research in German is Das Phänomen Yizu, migrantische Hochschulabsolventin als Chinas Wendepunktgeneration. This title translates to the Yizu phenomenon, migrant university graduates as China's watershed generation, ? This work has not yet been published in English. However, Dr. Suda has published 2 book chapters and 3 articles in English on this topic. In this research, Suda maps the relationship between a post-1980s rural migrant generation and a neoliberalizing city space, a tiered educational system, and contemporary formations of class and belonging. To address these topics, she uses ethnographic and archival data, as well as approaches from the sociology of knowledge. To complete work on this project, Dr. Suda held a multi-year fellowship of the Hans Böckler Foundation and was also a participant in the research project Patterns of Migrant Community Formation in China's mega-urban Pearl River Delta at the Institute for China Studies at the Free University Berlin. In prior work, Suda already studied a different city and group of urban dwellers. This work was published in her 2013 book, Chinese Lalao Organizing, Identity and Representation of Lesbian Women in Beijing. Suda has further taught at Free University and Humboldt University in Berlin. She currently holds a position as researcher at the National Discrimination and Racism Monitor of the German Center for Integration and Migration Research in Berlin. In parallel with her academic career, Suda has long worked in a variety of cultural, political, and media initiatives. One very notable project among these is her co-direction over more than a decade of the Asian Film Festival Berlin. Today, however, she's presenting on the long-term research that she conducted in Guangzhou, and the title of her talk is Ant Tribes, Yizu, in China's Contested Urban Space, a Discourse Perspective. After Dr. Suda speaks, we will have time for a Q&A. And in this Q&A, you will be able to either just raise your hand on screen or use that little icon, or you can put your questions in the chat. So now please join me in welcoming Dr. Suda.
Yeah, thank you very much for your invitation and very kind introduction, Annika. I feel very honored to share my work on the so-called N-tribe in China's urban space with you. Is it okay if I share my screen?
Yes.
The term public discourse has been discussed widely regarding China, since censorship plays an important role in regulating public life. For example, when taking Jürgen Habermas' concept of public sphere as a starting point. For my talk here today, I'm referring to the perception and discussion of text and audiovisual materials available for a broader Chinese urban audience, for example, in bookstores, newspaper stores, and online. Better equipped libraries are only accessible to university students in Chinese cities. The question if a discussion in China happens only officially and government approved, or semi-officially, for example, in a university seminar or in an art event, or even informally between friends or strangers in a public or private space, becomes increasingly difficult to answer when nearly all events and communication are framed by online environments, for example, websites, social media, or app groups. And since all online communication is potentially supervised by the Chinese government, for example, TV series, which can be found online on well-known websites for several years, can therefore be seen as government approved. The focus in my talk are the intersections, contradictions, and ambivalences in the discourse about the so-called untribed. My analysis is based on the sociology of knowledge approach to discourse, which was developed by the German sociologist Rainer Keller. He defines 5 layers of analysis: discourse production, the constitution of phenomena, dispositives, the effects of power and practices, subject positions and actors, and discourses and presentation in everyday life. And I further refer to Martina Löw's concept regarding the constitution of space, which also includes the role of information and discourses in the process of space constitution. Löw understands space as symbolic and material at the same time. Now I have the problem that the presentation is hanging. So what is the definition of Yizu, and in which context is it situated? Before going into details, examples of various functions of the Yizu in China's discourse about migration, education, social mobility on the one side, and structural, spatial, and discursive discrimination on the other side, I want to give you the main keywords, including in the definitions of Yizu in scholarly publications, but also in the internet and in interviews with recent graduates in Guangzhou, which were conducted in 2011 and 2012. The term Yizu itself was coined by the Beijing-based economic scholar and party secretary Li Lianzi. Yizu are understood as migrant university graduates in precarious working and living conditions in urban space. They are described as having a high level of knowledge, low income, as living in narrow spaces in urban environment, such as urban villages, Chengzhongcun, or basements, Disha Kongjian. They were born in the 1980s and although constructed as a group, seen as struggling individuals when it comes to agency. Especially in the scientific publications, the time frame for the precarious living condition is limited to 3 to 5 years maximum. Besides the keywords taken from scholarly publications, here one statement by one graduate, which I interviewed in Guangzhou. From what I personally understand, I would not see ants as limited to a certain social class, a certain circle or attitude. I would rather see it as a process. In a narrow sense, for many university graduates with a not strong enough family background, it is a path you must cross, a period, a process you must go through. But this process is a chance for change. With change, she means vertical mobility and access to the Chinese urban middle class, being the first generation in rural families which had the plan to move to an urban environment long term, becoming part of urban society with equal rights, changing the household registration, the so-called hukou to urban, also means to overcome the challenge of not having a strong family background, as he coins it. Chinese critical social scientists such as Lu Xueyi, Kun Nai, and Lu Huilin claim that in the context of Louis' economic concept of the turning point, there is no longer any political legitimation anymore to treat rural migrants in urban space differently in regard to payment and social status, creating a dual system of citizenship. Here, I would like to share a quote of Zhang Zhang from NYU with you to give you an idea of my contextual framework of current Chinese society, which she sees as crystallizing in China's urban space. While the central government and the ruling party still uphold socialism and essentially one-party rule as a window-dressing ideology, affirming its legitimacy in the name of continuity and stability, the tides of commercialization and globalization, which it helped to bring in and now to accelerate, have resulted in widespread privatization and a blatant form of capitalism that voraciously mixes the rawness of industrial capitalism and the slickness of the computer age post-industrial capitalism thriving alongside residues of socialism. The cities are the most visible and concentrated sites of this drastic and at times violent economic, social, and cultural transformation. And here I would like to depict the systemic and structural aspects regarding the creation of the phenomenon of Yizu in the context of a broken promise of vertical mobility. First, now I'm talking about this graphics you can see here. First, young people born in the 1980s with good grades and high aspirations migrate from a rural area into China's city to study in a vocational college or university. They are the first generation to receive tertiary higher education. Moving to the city and receiving higher education are seen as social mobility by them and their family already. Second, after graduation, they expect to find a good job in a first-tier city, to first rent and then buy a nice apartment there, and to be called a member of the Chinese middle class, or at least an aspiring member. But what happens to them instead after graduation? They are facing structural, spatial, and discursive discrimination. They cannot find regular work since they do not have the right social networks. They lack economic capital to start their own business, and they face unequal treatment due to their urban household registration. Due to the rural hukou, they are excluded from certain government work positions, and urban people assume they lack cultural capital, which is discussed under the term of suzhi. Since they often cannot easily find regular work, they have a low income and cannot rent a regular apartment, ending up in narrow and dark rooms in urban villages and basements. They are described with a derogatory term as an insects and are not welcomed at all as aspiring or new member of the urban middle class. This kind of negative classification plays an important role since the interpellation of a person or social group in public discourse, if you see it with Luis Althusser, structures the relationship between the state and the individual and assigns a social position to them in the symbolic order of a society. The term Yizu has diverse functions in public discourse, and in the key of it is the idea of temporality. The term Yizu is functionalized by different actors with different interests, sometimes with even contradictory narratives. For example, Yizu are seen as positive embodiment of hope for vertical mobility and at the same time as negative embodiment of low social, economic, and cultural capital, and symbol of social injustice in urban space. As educated actors in public discourse, on the other side, they are negotiating and shifting their own social position and the symbolic order in urban space. And at the same time, the concept of the Yizu is used for social government strategies by government institutions. It's having an effect of governmentality and it legitimizes the status quo. Since social media and the internet play an important role for the creation, dissemination, and discussion of narratives related to the Yizu, it is difficult to clearly describe authorship as, for example, expected in the sense of Habermas' concept of public discourse. Internet users acting on behalf of the Chinese government do not write under the real name, of course, and critical voices also use an alias of fake identity. Young authors are performing as an Yizu to marketize and better sell their work, and others, which fit into the definition, are clearly rejecting the ascription as a derogatory term, a negative classification, which labels them as a second-class citizen. So in summary, the Yizu on one hand is created as a positive figure, as the educated rural other with potential for social mobility. It symbolizes hope for those who work hard, just depending on their individual struggle to make it in this contested city. In comparison to less educated migrants working in factories, for example, in the Pearl River Delta. The latter have been depicted as a group which lacks education and culture and thus seems to be hopeless regarding social mobility. And sometimes they are even referred to as potential suicide candidates since the so-called Foxconn incidents in Shenzhen in 2010. Migrant factory workers are also seen as potential troublemakers, endangering social harmony regarding strikes and other forms of protest for labor rights. So you can see there's certain kind of conquer and divide discourse regarding higher educated and less educated migrants. On the other hand, the figure of the aunt is depicted as hardworking but hopeless and pitiful creature due to its lack of economic and social capital in comparison to the apartment-owning members of the upper urban middle class with sufficient economic and social capital, who can lead a comfortable lifestyle beyond mere survival. The fact that they are struggling in urban space, which itself holds the promise of privileges not available in rural space, often creates narratives in which spatial and social matters are intertwined. I will give you some examples from the Chinese popular TV series, The Struggle of the Ant Tribe, Yizu de Fendo and Warju, which can be translated as Snail House, also in comparison to statements made in the qualitative interviews conducted with recent graduates in the city of Guangzhou. In the discourse on Yizu, corruption is, presumably for censorship-related reason, not mentioned as a term, although it plays an important role for facilitating social injustice. Instead, it refers to complicated interpersonal relationships in general, or more specifically in the Chinese urban workplace, in which power and money are more important than a person's level of education and the skills needed in the workplace. In dealing with the issue of corruption, the Chinese central government includes political education and everyday Chinese discourse. For example, since the mid-90s, there are the so-called anti-corruption dramas, Fan Fu Ju, which are aired regularly on public television. Usually they involve a powerful corporate executive or party cadre in a medium-sized city or large town who continuously enriches himself. This includes bribery, nepotism, and entertaining young mistresses at state expense. In each series, there is an antagonist from the Chinese Communist Party who is incorruptible and presents himself as an official with a clean conscience. This person is called Qingguan Yishi against corruption. This narrative of officials or clean officials goes back to the historical literary figure of the incorruptible Judge Bao Zheng or Bao Gong. Bai writes on the function of this figure. Clean officials provide the locus and definite shape for the otherwise shapeless, fluid emotional display of anger. The anger is now directed toward the corrupt and framing the central conflict as one between clean and corrupt officials. Social conflicts and class stratification that are bound up with the issue of corruption are reduced into a morally unambiguous and political innocuous form of melodrama. In doing so, anti-corruption drama reconstitutes the party's moral leadership or hegemony in the Gramscian sense. This is a specific instance of how people's affect, their attention, volition, mood, passion is organized, disciplined, mobilized, and ultimately put into the service of specific political agendas. End of quote. In this context, Bai refers to the theoretical concept of emotional realism, which was developed by Ian Ang in the mid-80s to explain that even if the audience does not evaluate all events in a TV series as real, it still nevertheless can identify with the structure of feeling that is offered there. For example, there would be an offer of identification with the feeling of anger of the white-collar official over the bad guys, which is reproduced in all anti-corruption dramas. This form of cinematic offer of emotional identification for college graduates from rural areas and other low-income urban dwellers can also be seen in the series Waju and Ph.D, which I will discuss here. What is new in both series compared to those of the 90s is a stronger ambiguity in the terms of complicity and individual responsibility in the context of an increasingly materialistically oriented, stratifying and complex social structure in which almost all actors are involved in various forms of corruption when securing their position in urban space. The themes of corruption, inequality of opportunity in urban space, and love relationships are inextricably interwoven in the Waju and Ph.D series, and a wide range of emotional identification possibilities with great potential for conveying ideological messages are offered. In Waju, one spatial image is lined up with the next, in which the linkage of corruption, power, and gender relations is symbolized. On the one hand, in these spatial images, inequality of opportunity in terms of vertical mobility and precariousness of university graduates from rural regions is stylized as the norm in urban space. And on the other hand, the actions of people in the face of this inequality who engage in corrupt practices are ultimately sanctioned. The contradictory message that can be derived from this is that inequality of opportunity in urban space exists as a norm, so it is human at the same time to get involved in minor forms of corruption in everyday life in response to it. But involvement in major forms is still considered criminal. The boundaries between legitimate and illegitimate, however, are often fluid, creating moral gray areas and thus offering more potential for identification. Oliver Marquardt, in his analysis of various aspects of precarization in urban space, sees TV series as an important tool for governmentality regarding less privileged social groups. For example, you can see here some screenshots from the scenes from the series The Ant Tribe Struggles, in Chinese called Yizu de Ph.D, which was aired in 2012 and included 33 episodes. On the top are groups of young men and women sharing a room in an urban village in Beijing called Tangjialing, which was already teared down a few years after the TV series was shot. The men, when shown in their shared room, are talking about finding work and job interviews, being successful in the outside world, The women are talking about improving their looks and styles, finding a rich and successful boyfriend or husband, making fun of the roommate who believes in studying for the master entrance exam to work on her vertical mobility. This depiction of female youth can be seen as a strong counter perspective to the previous socialist narrative of women holding up half the sky. Below on the right side, you can see a situation in which a female protagonist of the series is facing her boss, who is asking for sexual favors in exchange for promotion in his company. The young woman declines and is consequently cut off from any career development and continues to be picked up by her poor boyfriend, who can only in quotation marks, afford a bicycle, not a car. She embodies the national ideal of a young woman, innocent and integer, not viable with material incentives. This visual quote of a young couple relates to a quote made previously in a Chinese dating show called If You Are the One, Fei Cheng Urao, in which one female candidate said that she would rather cry at the back of a BMW than love sitting at the back of a bicycle. This stands for the moral ambiguity which goes along with social change in the sense of the economization of everything, of all social relations. This protagonist also has an abortion when she unexpectedly becomes pregnant because she decides to wait to have a child until she and her boyfriend are properly married, saved enough money to buy an apartment, and reach the middle-class status quo. She really embodies the Chinese dream from a youth perspective and contributes to the image of nation building by Shiku, by eating bitterness first. In the TV series Snail House, or Dwelling in Narrowness, a young female migrant graduate is raped by a local older businessman who is also a party secretary and later on becomes his mistress to support her sister and brother-in-law with the monthly payments for an apartment in a big Chinese city. Therefore, she's first sacrificing herself for the sake of her sister, but later also starts to enjoy having more money and leaves her poor boyfriend, who's also a graduate with a rural background. When she becomes pregnant from the party secretary, fate punishes her and she loses the baby. Therefore, the message is here that temporarily to become a mistress, to help a family member to achieve a certain middle-class status in urban space is morally acceptable, but starting a family and becoming a second wife to an already married man is breaking the social norms. When the party secretary is doing corruption regarding real estate and the old tenant dies in a fire, he's also punished by fate and is not only arrested, but since he dies, this framework is made that this is a rather big case of corruption, so he deserves death. The body of the young female graduate is in both examples functionalized to negotiate the borders of social norms regarding corruption and gender relations. It is further used to discuss the economization of everyday life in China's urban space and social integrity. There's also different modes of representation or self-representation in different genres of books. And I will give you some example of different kind of masculinities described. Regarding novels and handbooks or mixed genres, I will present some examples regarding the negotiation of the economization of everyday life. We are discussing the masculinity and social norms embodied by male graduates from rural regions in China who now live in urban space. Geng Song and Qingxiang Yang define the characteristics of the post-80s generation literature, which can also be applied to literature published about and by Yizu as follows. The emergence of this community of writers resonates with the picture of Chinese literature envisioned by Capital, namely a younger generation of writers that breaks away from the existing socialist mechanism of literary production by addressing the market directly. Through this effective shift of production mode, New ideologies characterized by challenges to the authorities and the desire for free expressions are formed. In this process, writing has been redirected by capital to the consumption of both youth and imagination. Youth literature does not just indicate the age of this group of writers and the readers. More important, it commoditizes youth, transforming biological factors into consumerist factors. Besides youth, class and gender also play an important role regarding the self-representation of migrant graduates in novels and other genres, and some narratives can repeatedly be found, for example, that of the so-called Phoenix Man, which describes a male, tireless and selfless person. Derek Hurd described the figure of the Phoenix Man as follows. The Phoenix Man derives his name from the Chinese saying, a golden phoenix that has flown out from the valleys. Phoenix men came from a poor background, especially those who were born in a rural area, gained entry into a university through very hard work, and then remained in the city for employment. Although some young migrant graduates find this label insulting, most depictions of Phoenix men in mass media are rather positive. The hardships and cruelties of life have left a deep impact on their spirit, making it common for them to have a strong capacity for hard work, perseverance, and the courage to struggle and strive for a better situation, much more so than those born into families that were better off. End of quote. The keyword which can repeatedly be found in the normative narratives about Yizu men include constant struggle, competition, self-discipline, self-improvement as migrants, to prove their claim to an identity as male urbanite. Low income is seen as individual responsibility and the lack of manliness. There are also alternative narratives offered, for example, by the novel Untried Chinese Style. Here, the male protagonist, who works in a communication agency, also has to give in to a sexual relationship with his female superior at work to get promotion and an unlimited work contract, but he sees this as actually a proof for his masculinity as being desired as an urban subject, and at the same time, he strongly focuses on his cultural capital and knowledge, his memories and aspirations, and he creates a positive identity as a young male urbanite and concentrate on his agency in urban space. In one scene of the novel, he compares himself to a friend who is also a migrant graduate and who is a writer and author concentrating on poetry. And after some years of struggling, his friend commits suicide because he cannot decide to go along with the flow and do what he sees as selling his soul and dignity. At the same time, this friend has a strong symbolic function in the narrative. He stands for subjectivity and reflection as opposite to being functionalized for economic development and nation building. At the same time, his suicide also stands for the incompatibility of the zeitgeist and his vision of life. As a summary, it can be stated that especially moral integrity versus social upward mobility is discussed at the intersection of youth, gender, and class in the TV series and also different genres of books. The depiction of youth, gender-specific characters, and gender relations is used as a carrier for social governance messages on one side. At the same side, the depiction of youth and gender relations in novels and TV series is offered as narrative space to criticize the lack of equal opportunities for upward mobility in urban space. The nuclear family and the heteronormative couple are depicted as the only agency creating a safe space on the upward journey in China's urban society towards middle class. Identification with the imagined community of the Chinese nation is strongly suggested to the urban youth of both genders, while the membership in the urban Chinese middle class is structurally denied. Cultural and social distinction à la Bourdieu plays a major role in the constitution of urban space for all genders in China's first-tier cities when migrant graduates are concerned. If you look at the discourse on Yizu from a meta perspective, its inherent justification and critique of urban precarity, the question appears whether urban precarity in China can be seen as normality or exemption. If you look at the promise of social mobility made by the state in the official discourse, precarity is the exemption and can be overcome in 3 to 5 years if people are willing to study and work hard and basically eat bitterness for a while. That's the official message. The echo of this official promise is very strong in the sense of governmentality, since the ideological messages are delivered via various media, from political education classes over state-owned media programs, private TV series, novels, and various actors on the internet. It is internalized by many young aspiring urbanites from rural areas. On the other hand, there's a parallel critical discourse about failure, exhaustion, social injustice, and the limits of nation building and fast economic developments on the shoulders of millions of the so-called turning point generation of migrants who see themselves as part of urban space in society rather than temporary guests in urban space. They state that precarity should be the exemption, but describe it as a kind of normality since there is no immediate perspective for a way out. The tension between the official narrative and the critical narrative from below is strong and challenging social governance and always bears the potential for sudden and temporary protest against social injustice in social media. This tension is difficult to track down through scientifically research from abroad, since symbols and terms used in these critical narratives are always changing and are also often hijacked by government institutions who create new content and context for formerly critical terms. There's also a small conclusion. There is the potential that more inhabitants of China's urban space will see their lack of social mobility and unequal opportunities connected to structural barriers and thus to the responsibility of actors inside or related to the Chinese government via observing the proxy debate about the narrative figure of the ant, especially regarding online media. It is unlikely that the ants or ant tribes themselves will act as a political collective beyond the discursive context, since the discourse under this term was initiated and disseminated into the public by a scholar closely working together with the Chinese central government, but not by the migrant brothers themselves from below. Another reason might be their difference regarding their educational background, profession, and welfare situation, since for them the main aspect related to the figure of the ant is temporality and not an essential identity such as one social class, and additionally they strongly internalize the idea of struggling on your own, kaoziji, and the official promise of vertical mobility. It does not seem to be in their interest to take a risk and form a political collective to be heard in public discourse as a collective. On the other hand, the appearance and visibility of educated migrant urban subjects as such in literature and media can be seen as a shift of the position of migrants in the symbolic order of urban space. They are present and won't be overheard. Thank you for your attention. I'm very much looking forward to your questions and comments.
Thank you so much, Kimiko Suda, for this really fascinating presentation.